Thank you. Thank you all for joining us today. I know it's the last session of an intense 3-day conference. So in this panel, 6 feet under a data center, we want to discuss how do we die online? What happens to our digital memories? What happens to our digital legacies? What are the trends online when it comes to grief, and what technologies enable this? Joining me on this panel, we have Ian, ex-BBC R&D and the founder of Cubic Garden. We have Savina, who is my other co-founder of Identity 2.0, not imagining better digital futures, actually. Maybe it was my accent. But she is also a creative producer and artist. And we also have Lynn, a learning and development consultant, facilitator, and a death doula. So thank you guys for joining me today. To start us off, and I'll start with you, Ian, can you guys just briefly introduce yourself and let the audience know, how did you get involved with this topic?
Thank you. So, yes, it's a tragic story, but it's not that tragic. I almost died when I was 30, and I realized all of the legacy of my digital world. My parents are not digital, my sister barely understands it, and so being left with all this digital, my passwords, my hard drives full of stuff, it became very clear that this needs some serious thinking, and luckily I survived. But that made me kind of realize that there's a lot more to death than just the will. So,
Samina?
So at Identity 2.0, we probably began researching this topic in late 2023 when we were tasked with the question, what is a digital memory? And it began a really great series of rabbit holes in which we researched a lot of things and spoke to a lot of people. And then we met Ian at Republica last year, realized we had similar questions, and we've continued to research and explore this question today.
Thank you. Lynn?
I think for a very long time I've approached death from a distance, as many of us maybe do, until something happens in our lives. And I think mostly because my background's in education, I was thinking about how death and grief and trauma interrupts learning. So I was teaching, creating learning experiences from students all over the world, and concerned around, how does that interrupt, how does that shape how we learn? And things got very personal when someone who I very much love died, and the questions of care, the questions of memory, the questions of responsibilities came up and became very urgent. And I discovered in the process that we all have what I would say are superpowers in us that we sometimes discover when we support people who are dying. And I also discovered that we need much more good information about death and dying to have the agency that we need and make good decisions in vulnerable moments. And so I then, in German one would say, ich habe die Flucht nach vorne angetreten. I became active, and I decided to train as a death doula for 6 months. And since then, death has this exposure to death and to dying and to supporting those who die has really shaped my work also in other areas, from digitalizations to how generations, interact at work, to many other topics. Death is very present now.
Thank you so much, guys. So death is something that is guaranteed for all of us. We just don't know when it will happen, right? So my next question, I'll pose to you, Lynn. I'll go back to you. But if you were to die right now on this stage, a bit scary, but it could happen. What would happen to your digital assets and your digital identity?
I'll say it will probably be a mess. I still maintain that death is messy, even if we put a lot of energy into caring for our data and for our assets and having these conversations with people we love. there's a messiness that doesn't go away. But I'm a person who's really put a lot of energy and effort into being privacy and data sovereignty focused. And you know, I have a password manager. I have 89% of my stuff is in my password manager. But it poses a question, because if you safeguard your data very well during your life, because that's important to you, it makes things really difficult when you die. So to be very exact, I have all of that in my password manager, and then I have, you know, a password that's stored for that in a physical location in my apartment, and my partner has a key. But you know, that's a very imperfect mechanism, and I know Ian has potentially a better solution, so I'm curious to hear what Ian has to say. But maybe one other piece to this, even if we can get to all the subscriptions I have, you know, all the platforms I'm on, that is still problematic from a legal perspective, because platforms have the contracts with, you know, the user and not with the people who, even if you have a will and you specify who should actually have, you know, inherit your accounts, which you can in German law, for example, you may not have the technical means to access them. So it's complicated, and I think it would be a little messy. And maybe one granular thing that I never thought about, my file structures on all my devices are extremely intuitive to me, but someone trying to clean up or decide what to keep and what not to keep, they don't have the same intuitive understanding of what's important. So I've tried to do the thing that I know how to do best, and that is have very uncomfortable conversations with people about what I think, like do Swedish death cleaning with digital assets, to think about what would I want to give to whom, and actually write that down, and then be a minimalist, like in my apartment, and actually don't have a lot of have as little digital clutter as possible, so that there's not so much cleanup to do. That was a very long response. I apologize.
It's okay, thank you. A lot to take away from it, but you signaled Ian, and I'm going to pose the same question to you, Ian, because you did have a near-death experience that made you confront your digital identity. So what would it look like for you?
Yeah, so I think obviously before my death experience, my near-death experience, it was a mess. And actually on the screen, there's these USB keys with little passwords in them. So I've actually given my mum and my sister those keys. They have a code on them. That code unlocks a file, which is then unlocks one password manager. That password manager then has access to another password manager, because I don't trust one over the other. And you're right, this is a mess. It's a nightmare, especially when you're trying to explain this to someone who doesn't fully understand why you would do all this. So I think you're right about that conversation. And so what I've done is that conversation, I've actually kind of turned into this thing called the letter of wishes. So it explains exactly what to do, you know, because also you have to remember that these people are going through grief, right? It's not like a thing where you just like, oh, I'm just going to do a thing, follow these instructions. You know, they have to deal with a lot. And so they don't really want to have to go through all this as well. So I've written it very clearly. I've done it as easy as I possibly can. But I think that's helpful. Have I got everything? I don't think so. And this is the problem. You have to update it all the time. And that conversation is a conversation that I pretty much have every Christmas. You know, this is what I've added, this is what I've changed, that kind of thing. So it's one of the things that's really important about this, is that death isn't a thing where you just gotta go, all right, we've done it now, that's it. You know, it's a continuing conversation. And as you get older, things change, as more digital assets or subscriptions change, stuff like that, you need to have these conversations. And that's what I've been doing.
Yeah, I think if you are aware about these topics, you then have the active task to put things in place, which is like another piece of admin in your life, right? Like, I've said to Savina before, if I was to pass away before you, just delete everything that exists about me online. That's a personal preference because I want to be remembered through the memories of my loved one, not through the posts I've done on LinkedIn or Instagram or whatever that might be. But what things have I even put in place for her to even do that wish for me? Nothing. Like, it's such a huge admin task. But before we kind of delve more deeper into this topic, Savina, I want to ask you, if you could define what we mean when we say digital memories, digital legacy, digital estates, and things in this type of space.
I would probably say there is no definition. There's no easy definition to what a digital memory is. At Identity 2.0, we're actually in a bit of a research phase around this, and we got a small grant to ask some very interesting people their thoughts on this question, what is a digital memory? And I wrote down some of their responses because I think it's much more interesting than what I would have to say. But by having these conversations, it sort of unraveled how complicated defining a memory is, never mind a digital one, and added levels of like the political and sociological and sort of environmental implications of using technology to store or shape or view your memories. Like, it's messy. It's just as messy as grief, as we talk about. And so sometimes I think when we first started our research, we talked about digital memories as being social memories, so things that instantly go viral or maybe are in our shared digital culture. They're sort of digital memories and held within our kind of digital consciousness in a way. And then when we posed the question to a group of artists, researchers, and interdisciplinary workers, some of the things they said was something which is portable without degrading, a reconstruction of the past, which is fragility, it's fragile and suspended, and a non-tangible artifact that has somewhat recorded an event in time. I think a memory is so innately human that to then call something a digital memory is going to ebb and flow depending on whoever you are and your experiences with the internet.
Thank you. Ian, do you have anything to add about the definitions?
Oh, yeah. I have much to say. So I think, as I said, you're right. Yeah, it all depends on the person. And what's interesting is that I kind of have leaned a lot on stuff like images, but I shoot a lot of images. I've been shooting images here, and I've kind of tried to kind of store everything. So I have a network attached storage at home. I also back stuff up to Amazon Glacier, which I'm encrypted. But are those memories? Or are they just, how much do I actually want to keep? What does that mean to the other person? It's like a really interesting question. And that's just the images. When you start talking about music and videos and, just even, the social media posts, I have said that. I've also downloaded my Twitter archive. I have that. I also have copies of my Mastodon and my Fediverse account stuff, but do I actually want to keep that? How much use is that to my mum, my dad, my sister, to other people? I don't know. And the same for email. And this is the question that having those conversations right now and think about what you actually want to keep and why, and it will change. And I think that's it kind of like, I want me to decide, oh yeah, I should keep this. And then next week I think, actually, I don't want to keep this. I still have loads of like old phones in my locker somewhere, And do I actually need to keep these? I don't know. And it's a really difficult question. But I think I have erred on the side of keep it all, and then I can throw it away or get rid of it at some point, rather than go, oh no, I wish I kept that,
Thank you. I think also when we think about digital memories, people do default to images as the first thing. And then I think is about the act of remembering. So often people remember a photo that they've taken, and we've spoken, me and Savina have spoken about this in our work as well, is like after the invention of the camera, what do you remember? Do you remember the event that you were at, or do you remember taking the picture? Or would you forget the event unless you see the picture as well? Moving on, I want to talk a bit about some trends. So we've seen quite some interesting trends when it comes to grief and technology. We've seen avatars being created from data of those who have passed away. We've seen companies that have come up and startups that come up to manage your digital estates, holograms of the dead. Lynn, I want to ask you, what have been your thoughts on these types of trends? And are there any other experiments that you've seen in this space?
I was at the Life and Death Fair, so the Leben und Tod Messe, I think a week and a half ago, which is a different scene than this. And now we're here, and here we're thinking about digital futures, and death has a part in that. But at the Life and Death Fair, there's a space now for startups when it comes to death and grief tech, and so I think these spaces are merging, and that's important. And in these spaces that are merging, there's a lot of stuff. I think the things that we read about are virtual remembrance and meeting places for all those who are geographically apart. And if Lily Berger is in the audience, she has created one of those. There's spaces that we curate through memories that we send in via messenger services. And I think it's not so much about the trends, so that's something that's pretty standard now and up and coming, but it's what the trends say. And I think one thing that these trends say is that this idea of continuing bonds, so that our relationships don't end when people die, that this is trying to go digital, and we don't know how. So I think we live in this transcendental homelessness when it comes to hybrid lives. We have some rituals that are going away, even in our analog lives, and we're trying to create new rituals for our hybrid lives. And I think this is what these startups are responding to. And then what we also see in that, I think, is that we are curating our lives. We know this, right? But we have started to curate our deaths also while we're still alive, by thinking about what am I gonna pass on, what am I gonna feed into an AI system that then creates a story and a narrative for my hopefully loved ones to remember my complicated and messy life in a very sleek kind of way. I'm being mean, but that's the process. We're curating our dying already while we live. I have two more, but I don't know if I'm going over speaker time. Maybe someone else, and then I jump back in?
We move on to Savina, and then we'll come back to you, Lynn.
Yeah, I think a lot about the culture that we're creating for ourselves online, and I have spent too much time thinking about true crime. Not engaging with true crime, but thinking about true crime as a genre, and how it has grown and what that says about us, and the constant bombardment of advertising that women in particular get around true crime. And I am seeing, the elephant in the room, which we've already mentioned, is AI, and the way that it is growing and how that is overtaking the stories that we get to tell about ourselves. And I can see a future in which AI-generated avatars of people who have passed away colliding quite strongly with the true crime drama genre. And I came across an example from an American court just this month. And there was a man who unfortunately got in a collision with another man, and one of them shot the other one, and he passed away. So this man was then taken to court, and he was found guilty, and the judge was deciding what his sentence should be. And before the judge gave out their sentence, the families were able to share statements on how they felt, obviously how they were impacted by the death of their brother, their son, their friend. And his sister really struggled with coming up with a statement. And so instead, she wrote out what she thought her brother would want to say to the man who killed him. And rather than read out that statement, she generated an AI avatar video version of him and an AI-generated voice of him using his data to then say this speech out loud, and it was allowed to be shown in court in Arizona due to some laws. There's a great article about it in 404 Media, and they interviewed the sister as well. And the judge's reaction was, "I love that AI. I love that AI." And we all recognize how complicated grief is, and for her to go through that process of then also giving him words in which he said, "Oh, in another life, me and you," he's saying this to his murderer, "in me and you could have been friends, and I forgive you." It's such a strong statement to co-opt his voice like that. It makes me personally feel deeply uncomfortable knowing that my voice and my image could be used to say words that I never said on this earth once I passed away, to address, someone who has taken my life and taken my voice from me. And I just thought that was such a powerful example of, how complicated all this technology is, kind of where it's taking us and where it's leading to us. And unfortunately, my first thought was, this is going to make true crime a lot more complicated.
I think what's interesting about that example as well is, like, when you share stories like this, people often think that your loved ones would be the ones that kind of care for you and protect you. But it's come from his sister, and I'm sure it wasn't coming from a malicious or evil intent. It was her way of dealing with the grief, right? But it just kind of shows, like, maybe how much protection do you have when there's no kind of rules around this space. I know you had some extra points, Lynn, but we do have to move on. We do have to move on to the next question. But maybe you can weave some of your other experiments you've seen in this. But I want to speak about platforms. So we use different platforms to hold our digital memories that can then make up parts of our digital legacy, right? So it can be images, it can be blogs, it can be emails, it can be voice notes. What role, and I'll go to you, Lynn, so maybe you can weave some of your other points in, but what role do you think platforms should have in this space when it comes to death and digital legacy?
I don't know if I can answer what they should have as a role. I think maybe we stay a little on what role they do have, because I think what is a problem, and I'm sure everyone in the room agrees, is that we're talking about commercial platforms most of the time, right? And they hold our most emotional, most personal, most vulnerable traces, whether that's photos or messages, and they follow a commercial logic, which is speed, growth, and obsolescence, and they are designed to scale and not to last. So I think the question is, what about existential data sovereignty? If they carry this data and we lose control or access, to that data, I think the problem is the commercial logic in this. And so I'd be curious later if we get to other approaches to hosting our data that is not part of this commercial drive. I think another element that here is more talked about, but not in the mainstream discourses, is that, in a sense, our digital legacies, they rely on a very physical infrastructure that runs on data centers and requires water for cooling and invisible labor of gig workers, etc., etc. And so our ability, or the ability of some of us to live on digitally, relies on the invisible labor of other people. And that access to that digital afterlife is also not equally distributed. So I think the question is also who can afford to curate one's and maintain one's digital afterlife. And that goes away from platforms, but I think we also have an access and an equity conversation that goes beyond platforms.
Yeah. Thank you. Ian, I want to ask you the same question about platforms and what role do they have in this space, and if you have any ideas of what roles should they have in this space when it comes to death and digital legacy?
I have a lot to say, so I'm going to try and cut it down. Okay, so there's a page that I was looking at. So I kind of there's a bunch of bookmarks which we'll share later of different services and platforms that provide these kind of services. I looked at it about 2 years ago, and it was all working, and then I looked recently, and most of them are out of business. So that just even that says it all. Obviously, I'm a person who likes to have my own sovereignty. I also have the knowledge and have some of the time. So I completely understand. I'm not making a criticism of anyone else, but I do think that there is a really important thing around law and some of the regulations that we have. I think that, like what you said before about, there's an example of Dropbox in particular, who won't, if Dropbox thinks that someone else is accessing your account with your password, they'll just lock you out, and they won't allow access. And this is not just Dropbox, as we just talked about. And so I think there needs to be laws around this stuff, and the laws need to be very strong. I'm very conscious of the right to be forgotten, and I know we can have a whole discussion about that, but that's a whole different debate. But I think the most important thing is we need laws, but we also need some of the services to actually respect the fact that people will die and people will leave stuff, and they have easy ways to pass on things to people that maybe you name, or you've got to remember, this is a period of time when a family or loved ones are literally going through grief, and then they have to deal with Amazon saying, well, we can't actually provide you that, and it's just unbelievable, some of these cases. There's more I was going to say, but I will leave it at that.
Thank you. Lynn, did you want to add anything to that?
Maybe just two thoughts. I think you were talking about memory earlier, and I don't think that memory just belongs to one person. So I think a problem with the way that platforms have tried to tame the messiness of death is also that they cannot account for what Tamara Nice calls communicative traces that are network that exists between people, right? So I think that that's a limitation that is always there. And another piece is that I don't think that platforms, and again I'm preaching to the choir, but that platforms don't realize or do realize and do not honor the responsibility they have, given the data that we, who are very often digitally undereducated in that sense, put in there. Because the most common, the number one use case right now, for example, for Gen AI-based chatbots or LLM-based chatbots, is therapeutic and companionship uses. According to the Harvard Business Review. So we use them because they seem safer and maybe more comfortable and maybe less judgmental than real humans. And I think that's an issue in terms of the license we're giving to platforms, but also the license we're giving, to AI systems who become empathetic or empathic, and then we rely on them. And I understand that happens, and I'm very torn. I think there are huge possibilities in this, given that we have a care crisis, given that we have a loneliness crisis in the world. And I think it's important to experiment and try to find better systems that support our needs. But if it's an excuse to walk away from the messy interpersonal, we unlearn skills that we need to support one another as we're trying to save our planet and our relationships. So I think there's a really difficult tension in all of this. And I don't think that platforms are taking responsibility for this, obviously.
Yep. Did you want to quickly add something?
Very quickly.
Yeah.
Just to flip back to what Ian was saying earlier about how these services and these platforms that we're using, with all the messiness that comes with it, we've seen them also disappear. The demise of Twitter and kind of the mass exodus of that. Vine also used to hold so many collective memories, and it suddenly doesn't exist anymore. These platforms that we're saying need to regulate aren't going to be around forever. So what do we do then as well? Where is it safe to store and hold these spaces for us collectively?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Vine, shout out to Vine.
RIP.
I love using that platform as an example. But one thing I would add as well before we move on to the next question is death not being part of the design of the process, right? When you're designing, for example, a social media platform, or even just a platform that maybe holds your blogs or whatever it might be, no one really thinks about the end users passing away. Death is not really a topic at the top of people's minds, but death is something that can happen to anybody at any age. And I think that conversation about like designing for a very human thing is also at play.
But what platforms have understood is that death drives engagement, right? They have discovered that you can get engagement from those who are dying and those who are grieving the dying, right? 2060, if Facebook continues on its downward spiral, we have more dead users on Facebook than living ones. So that engagement piece, after the Virginia Tech shooting, I think became something really important to platforms, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. People revisiting that and seeing that their profiles as well. Serena, I'll go to you for the next question, but we've kind of already touched upon it a little bit in our conversation now, but what are some of the blind spots in today's conversations and applications that we use as a society?
Yeah, I think, Lynn, you brought it up earlier, but around what happens to those, we're talking about digital legacy and, digital grieving here today, and it's a privilege to be able to do that, to have this platform and to have the space and the time and the technology to talk about this, because not everyone has access to the internet at all times of the day. Not everyone can, download terabytes of their data at once because they don't have access to that technology. So what is happening to underserved communities? What is happening in the global south? What is happening outside of the Western perspective as well? I know, for example, in India, in Hindu communities, funerals can last 2 weeks at a time, and include all sorts of materials and rituals and intricacies. And so what happens when, there are startup technology companies trying to come into that space and almost make it more convenient, like a funeral on the go? There's some really great research done. I know. There's some really great research done by the journalism group called Rest of World into grief tech. I would really encourage people to check that out for non-Western perspectives on technology, because, as we sit here, we're based in the UK and Germany, and I guess that's where we're talking about this today. But if we think about the way these platforms are rolled out within the global south, it's their labor that these technologies are built out for, are built out using, but are very rarely thought of when aftercare and their afterlife is considered as well. And so, I think there's so much to learn from outside of a Western perspective. Like in Japan culture, I know they have deep respect and honoring the dead as well. They don't build, tall skyscrapers near graveyards because that's of great offense. And so what does it look like to kind of honor their spaces and physical spaces, and how does that transfer online? I'm really keen to, learn more from outside of our own perspectives.
Thank you. Lynn, do you have any other points around the blind spots in today's conversation?
Maybe just expanding on something that I hinted at. I think that death really reveals the networks of care that sustain us and that may not be as visible. And that is emotional, but also digital. So if we think of illness blogs, if we think of domains, domain fees that are getting paid, if we think about memorialization of posts so that memories stay alive, and very often then people who do this labor of love in the truest sense, say, I do it because I care, but it is labor and it takes energy and time. So I think we really see when someone is dying the networks of care, and that extends into the global reach of the infrastructures that sustain that. So that's what I touched on earlier, the invisible digital workers that make it possible for us to have a digital afterlife, right? So even, if we have AI tools that help us curate our legacy, they are trained through, thousands of hours of human input and review. So it's the hidden labor, I think, that is still a blind spot, especially for, when it comes to a topic like this, that's also still coming slowly out of the taboo zone.
Yeah, definitely. And just to touch upon what you said as well, Safina, I think not one size fits all in this conversation. I said earlier that I want everything about me online to be deleted. That's my personal preference. But as you said, I think in Mexican culture, if the person who passes away still remains, quote unquote, alive as long as you have traces of them. So this could be a photograph, this could be a letter, this could be something they owned, and they only really die once those things are gone. So what does that then mean for those people who curate their online profiles, right? They're gonna have a completely different outlook to what I might have. Which brings us to the next question, which is about kind of wider society. So we know that death is not a happy topic. It's something that's quite taboo, slowly coming out now. People are scared of death. It's filled with grief and unpositive emotions. So Serena, I'll go to you first, but how do you suggest we can talk about the importance of death when it relates to our online identities in today's societies?
Yeah, I think that word talk is the key one there. It's just starting and sparking these conversations off. Since we have started to talk to people and just mention, we're doing this talk and it's about digital legacy and dying online. Nearly everyone we've spoken to has a story. Everyone has been touched by this topic in some form or another. But it's really siloed. It's always like a single instance with this person, just a one-off. But if you connect the dots, there are a myriad of ways in which we are connecting and crossing over and all facing these problems and struggles together. And I guess a lot of the work that we do at Identity 2.0 is facing that question. How do we engage people with these really tricky topics? When we were first thinking about, how do you address that, I kind of look to popular culture. I look to kind of mass media as well. I think about shows like Black Mirror, and I have a complicated relationship with that show because I guess most people do in this room because you're in this room. And I went to a talk yesterday at Republica that explained probably why I felt that way. And we are introduced to a lot of shock topics in serialized media, so TV shows and thinking about on streaming platforms or linear TV. But and I wrote down the quote because it really got me, and it was, we have cautionary tales without mobilization. So we see these very dramatic conversations, but without anywhere to look for afterwards. And I think that's the kind of follow-up that we need. We need kind of organizations around that.
Thank you. And I just want to open up to anybody who wants to add to this, but how do we spotlight people who are already talking about this topic? For example, we're up here, but there's also so many other people who are talking about this and want to kind of bring this conversation to more people.
Can I add something? So there's a real, especially with the whole Eurostack and all these things, there's an opportunity for Europe to really take a lead on this. And I'm wondering how much thought around death is kind of going into that, or legacy. I think that could be a real big difference. I know there's a whole bunch of differences that there will be, but I think that could be something that's quite unique. And it also signifies kind of European values, about, being caring and being understanding and all these things that I don't think, we talked about the others who just don't care. I was actually thinking when Lynn was talking, a lot of my stuff is based around a PayPal account. As soon as I die and there's no more money in that, the PayPal account stops, means my domain name stops, which means that something else stops. And so, that's something I'm going to have to think about. I didn't even think about it until literally now. And so I just feel like there's something, like there's some of the open source community, Europe, and I think that there's a really good opportunity, especially for designers, to start thinking about how do I integrate this into the product or the service. And it isn't just the final thing I was going to say, it isn't just death, it's also when someone maybe has a critical illness. So for example, my dad has dementia. And so I had to do all of the stuff to like cover his email address and all this other stuff. And so that's something that's really difficult to deal with, but none of the services do that very well. And so there's a really good opportunity to do something which is much more humane and much more fitting with the values that we all have, we all share.
Thank you. And to kind of take it a bit deeper, I'll go to you first, Lynn, is we want to bring these conversations up, but how do we even bring these conversations up to younger audiences? We know that teens and young adults are constantly online, and when you're young, you're not going to be thinking about dying. So
I think we do.
Yeah?
Sorry,
Okay.
I interrupted you.
No, go for it. No, please.
I think, and I don't have, this is anecdotal evidence and maybe patterns from research, but I don't think that younger people don't think about this. I think quite the opposite. I think that we see huge anticipatory grief in younger generations about the futures that are not possible anymore. Climate crisis, media exposure to global crises, all over the place. A broken progress promise, etc. So I think there is this anticipatory grief and this awareness, mass extinction, right? Like it's so present. And I think that maybe we're thinking that younger generations are not thinking so much about it, but it may be that they're engaging with themes of death and grief in a very different way. And this is me jumping to conclusions, but if I look at the skull emoji, which means, I'm dying from laughter, that's just a very different way of dealing with the complex topic of death. And if I think about The Sims, which apparently is much more of a millennial thing, that's thinking through big questions by moving characters through care work and through death care and through questions of what's going to die to a protagonist and do I want to haunt people, etc. So there's a dimension to this already in the discourse, and I would say that we should talk about that with younger generations more. In fact, I would say that we should try to pick them out, up where they're at in gaming, in meme culture, etc., and then try to create spaces where generations can learn from each other. Because I think that without wanting to make things about generations as boxes, but I do think that we have to teach each other a lot across cultures, without appropriation, with respect, but also across generations about how we might want to die and how we bridge digital and analog.
Thank you. Ian, I want to also ask this question to you because I know you do work with younger adults. And what have you seen? What type of conversations have you had?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I've seen young people using kind of games engines to try things and to experiment and to it's almost like trying things and seeing what happens, and then if it doesn't quite work out, they can do something different. I think there's definitely a lot of that. I've also seen lots of young people who are comforting each other via kind of like social media. Yeah, that's I'm sure you've probably seen some of the stuff. And once again, they're using emojis that a lot of us are like, why are they sending that? I don't understand what that means. So I've seen a lot of that. You also have to bear in mind that a lot of the young people are a lot more connected with their mental health. There's been a real big push, and there's a lot more of these kind of more honest and frank discussions. I don't have children, but if you have children, or then I think it's worthwhile like discuss this, and you'll be surprised what you might actually kind of get in return. My partner is a teacher, and so she teaches primary school, so under 11s, and she says that they always do this. They kind of every year they do this. It's not a taboo subject. They talk about it quite a lot, and they also look at it from different cultures as well. So I think it's definitely worth having that conversation much sooner, and you'll be surprised that actually, you might get some really positive, interesting conversation. They might even teach you something.
Thank you. So I want to bring this conversation to a close, and maybe we'll have like 10 minutes for some audience questions as well. But before we end it, I want to ask all of you, what change do you want to see in the future in relation to digital legacy and memories? And for this change to happen, what tech do you think we need to enable it? Would you like to go first, Ian?
Okay. I'm not the regular tech guy, but okay. So I was asking before what it's like in Germany. So in the UK, you have a will, and the will is a legal document, and then you get another document which is not legal, but you can write your letter of wishes. One of the things that I'm exploring is that if that was a machine readable format, then it can also trigger or make things happen. So for example, I want to remove all of the stuff from this hard drive, or I want all these images moved from here to here. That kind of thing seems like it's possible, it's doable. So that's something I would like to do, but I definitely think with the legal side is definitely the most important part, and that needs to get cleared up.
Thank you. Smina?
I think a lot about like community memories and how we remember each other and how we remember together. And I've been really inspired by thinking around community-owned data centers or local data centers, a data center for your local library that can archive, what your community's been up to. And I would love to see more of that.
Thank you. Lynn?
I second that. And I think that in order to create these structures, we need much more digital literacy in society. And so I would want, and this is of course my education background speaking, but I would want to have death education and death education for hybrid life and death anchored in school curricula. So that, we talk about this from philosophy to IT, all the way through media education, so that we have that literacy to make decisions and care for each other and build the infrastructures that allow us to become sovereign or more independent from, big platforms that have a commercial logic.
Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. We have about 10 minutes, I believe, for questions. Oh, okay. Great. We have somebody coming with the microphone.
Oh, sitting in the back and getting the first question. Amazing. Thank you so much. This was such a surprise. And I'm sorry if I am referring to something that you might have said in the beginning because I missed the first part. So many thoughts going on. But with this, I am, the first culture background is German, and obviously curation and memory is always a big topic with the legacy of the Holocaust. And then I also noticed with the pictures that are painted of tech milliards and people in the US, that longevity is a much bigger topic. It seems to me, I don't know about the UK, than in Germany. I feel like eternal life, investing billions into staying alive is not a thing in Germany. People are not obsessed about that. Prove me wrong. And I wondered, like, that has a lot to do with curation, I think. Also this like idea of I am in charge of my life and I decide when I die, or I can stretch my life into future and I have the power to make it longer. And I don't know where, but I learned about these archives that they want to construct, that you can kind of walk through your own memories or walk through somebody else's memories. And I wonder, just very open question about your thoughts about that, because my feeling is very weird, because memories are so curated, whether there should be an interest about walking through somebody else's memories and what image of reality that will paint.
Can I talk about the tech bros? Yeah, Brian Johnson,
You
weird
can talk
guy.
about the tech bros.
Love
The
to.
dream. Deeply unsettling man that is trying to use his son's DNA to prolong his own life. I think that ties into the mindset that Silicon Valley has sold all of us on in terms of absolute growth, absolute extraction. Like, we're going to live forever because we're the best people to live forever. And I'm glad that you brought up Holocaust memory as well, because I think there is such a line through to eugenics that we're seeing in the rise of the far right, which goes through to the tech bros kind of mindset as well, of like them thinking of them being the superior beings, therefore their lineage needs to carry on. Elon Musk literally is part of that kind of crew as well. And I think there's a whole through line you could kind of map out of eugenics that goes all the way through to the rise of the kind of tech far-right rise, but maybe someone else can talk about the memory stuff if you wanted to touch on that.
I was just going to say, good luck trying to get into America now. Okay, so my thoughts on this is that the technology can do almost anything you want. And there will always be somebody who's trying to sell you on this idea of, we can form this amazing memory of you, and we need to stop and think. And this is why I always kind of I like the idea of this letter of wishes. It's the kind of the wishes of the person. But the thing about the letter of wishes is that you can override it. A legal will, you cannot. And sometimes there's things that the person who's dying wants. Like, some people want their DNA shot up into space. That's lovely, but maybe the rest of the family can, and they're actually trying to save enough money so they can actually afford their mortgage. And so I think that there's some things that do need to be overwritten. And so I think it's important to have that balance. I don't know, I have lots more feelings about all of this, but I think as the kind of, these are my wishes, but these are not things that you always have to do. It's really important. That kind of negotiability is super important.
Thank you. Anybody else with a question? Also, can we get the next slide? Because we have a QR code of resources.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting. I was just wondering, if we forget about public platforms like social media accounts or something like that, isn't most of our digital stuff really private? I would like to ask each and every one of you, if you know that you will die in a month, what would you share with your families or loved ones or friends? Because I just checked, I have almost 60,000 photos in my iCloud.
Is that all?
And I don't want to share them. I share already what I want to share, There's nothing secret, but it's mine, it's personal. Same goes with notes and, I don't share my email. So what would you share?
Nothing. I already told Savina she's deleting everything. So I have someone to do that for me. I don't think I would share anything. And I think when you have things on your personal device, it might be, people can get into it, but unless you've you've shared those passwords, they might not be able to access your Notes app, for example. For me, when I think about what people have access to is the things that I've shared publicly, or the things, even if they're not public, like I have a private Instagram account with just my friends and family, but there's like at least 100 people on there, right? So they still have access to that. People still have access to my LinkedIn. People have access to my website where I have my blog on there and my thoughts on there. I think those are the stuff I think about, oh, maybe I don't want them shared, but they're still available in a public domain. But I feel like I've shared what I've wanted to share. So yeah, Savina, I hope you do it for me. Ian, would you like to go next?
Okay. I hear what you're saying. So when I almost died, I was about to buy a flat in Manchester. It was really important that my parents and my sister had access to my bank account, had access to the documentation, they didn't know anything about this. So it's really important. I think I like the idea of it, being able to it changes. It's not like I will share that all the time, but I may want to share the deeds with them, so they don't have to go through that hassle of trying to get that. I also share things like, passwords is a really important one. It's, to be able to get in there and get some of the things. I'm much more selective about what I share, but I also share, for example, I got stuff that I would like to share after I'm dead. So that is my legacy. So I have a blog post, which they know that's the blog that needs to get posted, rather than them struggling with trying to explain, well, Ian's now dead, for example. So I know what you're saying, but I do also think that it's different for everyone, and everyone's got different ways of approaching grief and all this.
I'll be very quick, because my answer keeps changing. It keeps changing as I learn more about this space, as I grow, as I change, as the platforms change. One thing I've been trying to do is call myself an artist more, because I'm trying to figure out what that means for me. And I guess there's part of me that thinks about, when artists who are more famous in the public world, when they pass away, who gets access to their diaries and their processes and their, the lyrics that they scribbled on a napkin, how does that become then public property? I'm never going to get to that stage, and I'm totally fine with that. But is there something in my creative process that is like a random notes that I wrote at like Republica 3 years ago, I would want to be shared, because that would explain then and unlock some kind of unlock a meaning behind something physical that I then want to share. The only thing I know is that I want my diaries to be destroyed. I do not want anyone to access my physical diaries. Digital keeps changing though, yeah.
I was thinking earlier of this project Final Backup by 2 artists. They created different versions of urns for your digital data, and one dissolves in water, another one, you could put on ice forever, and another one, you illuminates a gravestone with your data and tells stories. And that's, of course, speculative design. And I think I would like to be able to put all my data into an urn and give it to someone I really trust and have them destroy that. So I'm more with you on that. I trust that the complexity and, the universe within me cannot be captured in, a piece of data or digital kind of artifact. And so I trust that the people who love me and care about me carry part of me, in them, and that even if someone gets dementia and starts forgetting things, the echo in our bodies is stronger of interpersonal contact, than digital artifacts. But maybe I'm a child of my generation to say this, I don't know.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time. We have to get off stage. But we're going to be sticking around. So if we didn't get to your question, please just come up to us, ask us your questions. We will happily answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Arda.
Thank you, Arda.